Welcome to the Explainer. Think about a concept that just feels way too massive, or maybe too abstract, or frankly, just too alien to even wrap your head around. Like, how does your brain actually handle that? Well, it builds a bridge. Today, we're on a mission to totally demystify how we use everyday comparisons to conquer those incredibly complex ideas. We're going to dissect the architecture of that bridge and explore what I like to call the connective tissue of reason itself. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Take a look at this classic example. Just as the roots nourish a tree, education nourishes the mind. Now, we're taking something deeply familiar and tangible, right? The very biological process of a tree sucking up water and nutrients from the dirt. And we're using it to explain something completely invisible and abstract, how learning actually feeds the human intellect. This isn't just pretty poetry here. It's a profound cognitive mechanism hard at work. To give us a cognitive map for our structured journey today, here is our agenda. We'll start with the power of analogies, move on to mapping the unknown, open up the analogy toolbox, learn about spotting weak comparisons, and finally wrap up with the connective tissue.
All right, Section 1, the power of analogies.
We often kind of mistakenly think of analogies as these simple little literary devices, something you'd only dust off for a high school English essay just to make it sound a bit more poetic. But honestly, that completely undersells them. These things are heavy-duty cognitive machinery, absolutely central to our most important intellectual pursuits. When we're problem-solving, what do? We look for a past hurdle that's analogous to our current one, just to figure out a viable solution. In teaching, we use the known to explain the unknown, basically anchoring a brand new concept to an old, sturdy foundation. And when it comes to critical thinking, well, testing the limits of a comparison is exactly how we evaluate the truth of complex arguments. So yeah, analogies, they are the very engines of human understanding.
Moving right along to Section 2, mapping the unknown.
How does your brain actually bridge that massive gap between what you already know and what you're frantically trying to figure out? It certainly doesn't just jump blindly into the void. Analogical reasoning works by strategically mapping relationships. Your brain looks at a new problem and goes, hey, situation A and situation B share these very specific features. Therefore, I can safely infer they might share others too. So the crucial point is, this is the ultimate cognitive shortcut. You don't have to learn every single new phenomenon from absolute scratch. You just have to find the right mental map that already exists somewhere in your memory.
Let's open things up in Section 3, the analogy toolbox.
If we want to use this mental machinery effectively, we've got to pull out the exact right gears for the job. Not every comparison works the same way, right? First, we have literal analogies. These operate within the exact same category, like, say, comparing the public transit infrastructure of two different cities, or arguing over the hardware specs of two competing smartphones. It's a direct, apples-to-apples, one-to-one comparison. Figurative analogies, on the other hand, do the heavy lifting for abstract ideas by comparing entirely different domains. When we say life is a journey, we're mapping the physical domain of travel straight onto human existence. They operate on a completely different conceptual level, which is exactly what allows us to grasp the ungraspable.
And this brilliantly illustrates the full framework we're working with here. Moving beyond the basics, we've got functional and structural analogies to add to our toolbox. A functional analogy focuses purely on roles. For instance, a key is to a lock as a password is to an account. Boom, you instantly grasp the role of a digital password because, well, you've been locking physical doors your entire life. Then we have structural analogies, which are all about highlighting organization. Think, the atom is like a solar system. Here, we take the massive, highly visible structure of planets orbiting a sun to explain the microscopic, completely invisible structure of electrons orbiting a nucleus. It's just such a brilliant way to instantly transfer complex organizational knowledge without actually needing a PhD in quantum physics.
Which brings us to Section 4, spotting weak comparisons.
Because this shortcut is so deeply ingrained in how we think, it can honestly be incredibly dangerous if it's used to mislead us. A bad analogy is essentially a bridge to nowhere. So, here is your personal checklist for testing literally any comparison you encounter. Step 1. Check relevance. Ask yourself, do the features being compared actually matter to the conclusion being drawn? If they're just superficial, the analogy completely falls apart. Step 2. Assess proportional similarity. It's just simple math. The more shared, highly relevant features you have between the two domains, the stronger the analogy is. And step 3. Avoid false analogies. This is where we mistakenly equate completely unrelated phenomena, like, say, comparing a household checkbook to a wildly complex national economy. They are absolutely not the same thing. I challenge you to start running the arguments you hear every single day through this exact 3-step test. You'll be amazed at what you catch. Finally, let's zoom out for Section 5, the connective tissue. Let's just slow down for a second and look at the big picture of human logic here.
In philosophy, we have deductive reasoning, which gives us absolute mathematical certainty. Then we have inductive reasoning, which deals more in probabilities and everyday observations. Well, analogies essentially bridge the gap between these two massive concepts. Now, to be clear, an analogy is never deductively certain. Just because two things are similar doesn't guarantee they're identical in every single way. But they do provide incredible inductive strength by suggesting highly probable connections. Fun fact for you, this exact inductive leap is exactly why analogies are the absolute backbone of the legal system. Precedent and probability completely rule the courtroom, and analogies are how lawyers connect past cases to present ones.
To bring it all together, analogies act as our ultimate cognitive shortcuts, and they achieve three absolutely critical things for us. First, they make the unfamiliar beautifully accessible. Second, they make arguments deeply persuasive because they instantly resonate with what we already know. And third, they make complex ideas undeniably memorable. They truly, literally, are the connective tissue of reasoning, of teaching, and of human creativity.
So, I want to leave you with this question. Now that you understand the mechanics of literal, figurative, functional, and structural comparisons, now that you know exactly how to map relationships and test for relevance, how will you use this connective tissue to make your next big argument unforgettable? The tools are right there in your mind, ready to build that bridge. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.